Hello, everyone, and good whatever moment of this wonderful day you are enjoying on your time zones. And welcome into our last week of June, middle of the week conversation. We will be spending the next hour talking about a culture of autonomy and accountability. My name is Minola Jacques. I will be your co host for the next hour. We have Jessa working her magic backstage, keeping us safe from all things tech and logistics. And we do have an amazing lineup of speakers who just can't wait to come on screen and share their insights and their energy around the topic with you. I will ask people in the audience if you can just help us with dropping a few notes, maybe just letting us know where you're watching us from or where you're listening to us from. And just let us know that everything is up and running and you can see us, you can hear us, and also you will help us travel around the world vicariously through your notes and your locations. Jessa, if we can just bring the speakers up on the stage, and while they'll settle into their Zoom boxes and get used to seeing their faces next to one another, I will encourage people in the audience. Please consider this conversation space as much yours as it is our speakers. And whatever it is that we are talking about with our panelists, always drop your own reflections, your own reactions, your own opinions on the topic. And that is such a wonderful, wonderful way to help this community grow and learn from each other. So I see comments coming in. Thank you so very much. So apparently we're up, we're running, and people can hear us, people can see us. Otherwise, no pressure. And we will try to make the most out of our time together. What we will do, I will start passing the e-mic around clockwise as you appear on the screen. And I will ask you to firstly just shortly introduce yourselves. And also, for the purpose of our time together today, what is your simplest take definition of autonomy that you bring into our conversation today? Krisana, it's so good to see you. Welcome. You are our pioneer today.
No problem. It's good to see you too. Thank you for having me. My name is Krisana Wallace. I am from the Boston, Massachusetts area. I have been in HR for over 12 years. Ever since I graduated college, I have always been in HR and have never looked back. Surprisingly, I haven't been scared off yet. And we, at the company that I work for, we do sustainability technology solutions. So I'm the director of people and culture there, a company called Clearest. And I really love HR because I feel like it is the one position where you hold a lot of responsibility for employees' engagement and satisfaction in their work life. And that is, a majority of the time that we spend is working. So I hold that responsibility dearly to my heart. And my definition of autonomy is I'd like to start with what autonomy is not. And I think autonomy is not just throwing someone into the fire and saying, good luck, raise your hand if you need help. I think it's more about setting some boundaries, or I like to call them goalposts. However wide those need to be for somebody is different. And it's all about working with your manager to learn and grow together and to be able to understand where each of you are comfortable in those boundaries. And then from there, just letting the employee fly. And then that's where they can raise their hand and ask for help. So it's not being thrown into the fire. It's instead setting those boundaries and working within them.
Thank you. And I don't know if it's just me, but your audio, it's a little bit spotty and it sounds a little bit rough, as if your microphone is rubbing against a zipper or a rough fabric. Oh, okay. So let's see how it goes. We go agile, not fragile, and we will fix it on the go. Thank you. Jason, it's been a while since I saw you on my screen. So good to see you.
You also. Thanks, Manola, and welcome panelists and everyone listening around the world. Jason Rosoli, and have roughly about 25 years in human resources and labor relations, or people services and employee relations. Have spent it in most of my time in corporate environments. Now I do a lot of consulting I'm on site today at one of my clients in Southern California, as you can see with the Disneyland theme in the conference room I'm in. So, autonomy to me, individuals is individualism represented through collaboration, and and teamwork. So it's being able to find the balance between employee individuality, okay, and what their needs are from that perspective, whether it's a work need, a personal need, a lifestyle need, a job experience need, while also still collectively working together from a team environment to accomplish the organization's mission and values. So it's fairly short answer, but that's what it means to me. So the individual is collectively being part of the whole team. So
Thank you so very much, Jason. And Jessica, so good to see you today.
Good to see you too. So hello everyone, Jessica Siegel, calling in from Atlanta, Georgia today. I have been in the world of HR for 20 plus years. My first job ever, I opened the second Panera Bread location in the country when I was 16 years old, got hired to make sandwiches and ended up doing all the hiring, interviewing, onboarding, and wrote the first training manuals and training aids for corporate Panera in between my high school classes. And then I was like, what is this? What is this called? What is this job called? I want to go to college for this and do this for my career. And I have never really strayed from that path. I am currently the VP of Talent Development for Lockton for the Southeast region, which is a private insurance broker that specializes in property and casualty and employee benefits. And I would say my definition of autonomy is when employees have the ability to choose how they do things. And it's not so much red tape and politics that's dictating exactly how things need to be done. Those things can dictate what needs to be done, when those things need to be completed, the order of operations or whatever it is, but really the ability to kind of choose in their day-to-day how they use their time, their talent, and their brains to solve problems for the organization, as opposed to having all of that predetermined for them.
Thank you. And making our panel wholesome. Jackie, good to see you. I think we've been friends for a while, but we never ended up on the same screen at the same time. So it's good to have you today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and be joined by my esteemed panelists as well. My name is Jackie Johnston, and I'm actually based just outside of Austin, Texas. I founded Talent Vantage about 2 years ago after a lovely career. I really do enjoy my experiences and lifetime in human resources, in leadership development and talent management. I worked in a cross-section of industries and sizes of businesses as well. But I'm really all about empowering people and elevating business in a way that gets at the underlying friction. And so this topic is key to that, because oftentimes autonomy, accountability, responsibility are things that are not really focused in on, yet underlying the shared meaning and the connectivity of our deliverables and how we show up to do work in an autonomous way that we can be accountable for. So succinctly, I would say that employee autonomy is what everybody has shared. And really, it's looking at the various degrees of freedom, discretion that employees can exercise in doing their work. And there's a number of key components that other panelists have shared, from decision-making frameworks to flexibility. I love what Jason said about some of that level of individuality and what that might look like. Self-management, and what does it mean to be responsible to bridge that gap for autonomous work are some of the factors that I think about when I think about autonomy in the workplace.
Thank you all so very much for being here today. And you probably saw me smiling just a few seconds ago, because one thing that I do, I oftentimes look across the screen and I try to figure out what we have in common. Sometimes we have a panel full of people wearing glasses, but today I see that we all come from the middle of the alphabet. So we have 3 J's, 1 K, 1 M. So we're good to go. Now, before we dive very, very deep into the topic, I would really invite you to share some examples of how autonomy shows up in the workplace. What are some behaviors that we associate with employees exercising their autonomy? And I would advance an educated guess that maybe not all autonomies are born equal. So if we can look at some different expressions of autonomy, that would be great. Also, I do want to specifically open this question to the audience as well, because I would, again, venture a guess that there are cultural nuances around employee autonomy. There are maybe some generational nuances around this topic. Maybe there are some other intersectionalities coming into play when we speak about employee autonomy. Just what are some autonomy expressing behaviors that you see most often within the workplace? And we will consider this round as the unmuting competition rehearsal. So we will do it popcorn style, just hop in the conversation as inspiration strikes.
I can kick us off. So the first thing that popped into my head with autonomy behaviors is motivation and self-determination, right? So for employees to truly have a high level of autonomy, that means they need to take charge of the project, of the situation, of the client interface, whatever it is. If you don't have that motivation and self-determination, then you probably need a little more structure or a standard operating procedure or workflow that you can follow more closely. But I really think self-determination and motivation and that drive to figure out how things work better for you, or process improvement that could streamline, how your whole team or how the whole organization does this task or this procedure. But I really think that motivation and self-determination is a huge factor in all of this, because if people don't have that, then they probably really need that structure, whether they realize that or not.
Thank you. And Chrisana, I saw you unmuted there before.
Yeah, I think to think of the answer here in the most literal sense, I would say maybe employees coming to a discussion or a project planning meeting with a few solutions already proposed. So being prepared, similar to what Jessica said, is that motivation and self-determination of being able to do the research ahead of time, come with the data, and then be prepared when asked a question, maybe by a more senior manager or an executive, they have the answer already prepared. It plays into the motivation, self-determination, but it also plays into the autonomy, where they were able to think of the I guess what the questions that might be asked ahead of time and become prepared with solutions and answers. I think another example of this might be where, especially when you're working in a remote environment, which it looks like some of us are, there are a lot of things happening all the time in business. And when we're remote, we're not able to constantly be with each other, pass each other in the halls and talk about, what happened in that day that I saw you in with so-and-so, or, have you had a chance to work on this that we talked about yesterday? Those kinds of things require a meeting. And so those conversations don't happen as often. And so I think autonomy happens more frequently because you're not able to have those quick check-ins. And so that might look like employees making material decisions on their own without checking with their manager. And sometimes those decisions are great, and you, as a manager, you agree with them, or sometimes you don't, and that's where you're able to kind of reel it back in and reset those goalposts, as I talked about earlier, and learn how to work within them. So yeah, as an employee, I think it looks like that, making those decisions on your own, with, in mind what you think your manager might want you to do. And then as a manager is, coaching your employees to be able to come to these meetings with the data, the research, and able to answer questions as they come up.
Thank you. Chrisana, unfortunately, your audio is getting more and more challenging. So if you have a plan B that's easy to implement, that would be greatly appreciated.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. So Jason or Jackie, Jason and then Jackie.
Oh, okay. Definitely, Christina mentioned it about being remote. So flexible work arrangements, whether it's work hours or work locations, is absolutely a big driver of employee autonomy into making those decisions themselves to drive engagement and employee experience. And obviously is a direct impact on employee turnover and retention. So those are some obvious ones. The other big one is project work and goal setting. I see is in one of my prior employers that I worked for, we had KPIs where half the goals that were set, KPIs, key performance indicators that were set for with their OKRs, operational key results, were based on dictated ones, company objectives, but the other 50% were things that the employees themselves could come up with, associates themselves could come up with in coordination with their supervisor. So that way it gives some autonomy into their own things that they felt were important within their role. The other thing is project work. So many companies obviously do this, whether it's, a lot of tech companies do this, research companies do this, healthcare companies do this, determining, employees can select onto certain project teams to work on projects that they feel are very important to them within the organization that are available, or again, self-select their own projects, that they want to work on as a certain amount of time spent at work. So that's another key example of project autonomy, of employee autonomy in the workplace that I've noticed in the past through past experiences and companies that I consult with nowadays.
Thank you.
Yes, and yes. So definitely self-directed to an extent. I think we'd be remiss at not also looking at social motivations and the social behaviors of teams, and what that looks like to foster collaborative decision-making and ideation, and being able to have those conversations to behave and encourage autonomous decision-making, really, and contribution. So yes, the personal motivation, do I want to do this? Do I have the ability to do it? Or from a self-confidence standpoint, do I believe I am behaving in a way that demonstrates I have the competence and confidence to do it? And then socially, what does it look like when I show up within the team to exercise input, collaboration, and decision-making, and arrive at the ability to solve a problem autonomously. Those were some of the thoughts that I had to extend on the conversation.
Thank you all. And let's now bring accountability into our conversation space. And what is the relationship between autonomy and accountability? Can we also maybe look into what happens when we have a lot of autonomy and not a lot of accountability? So what is the dynamic between autonomy and accountability? And Jessica, I would invite you to give it a first go.
So when I think about autonomy and accountability, I think about how they really go hand in hand, because autonomy isn't about having it be a free-for-all. Autonomy, in my mind, is like if you work for yourself, you can figure out how to get things done or meet the needs of your clients, or that's different. But when you're working for an organization, you still have, whether it's KPIs, OKRs, goals, however your company does goals that you're trying to meet. You still have deadlines and things that you need to hit. So being very clear about the accountability structure, and this needs to happen by this date for this deliverable for this project or client meeting or whatever it is very key. I think the autonomy comes in of how do you prioritize the tasks that go into that larger task? What's the order of operations? How do you want to get those things done? But when you're part of a team and working in an organization, you have deliverables that have hard deadlines, or you need to meet that deadline so the other people on your team can put that in the RFP, the request for proposal for a client, or whatever it is. So I think it's really clear that you need to have some accountability structure of here's the big things that need to happen, but whatever path you want to take to get those things done by X, Y, or Z date is fine. And that's where the autonomy comes in.
Jason.
So I think of this as almost like, and I agree with what Jessica just said, definitely. I'm going to use a sports analogy. So, a professional sports team or any sports team, college basketball, whatever, is an autonomous team, right? So the coach gives guidelines of expectations. They give certain, strategy. They have obviously goals set. But when on the playing field, okay, the team is autonomous in how they make those decisions throughout within the guidelines. Okay, again, just like Jessica said, clear goals are set. Obviously, win, score a certain amount of points, keep the ball or puck or whatever in possession for a certain amount of time, utilize space. So there's guidelines, but there's checks and balances along the way. I always like to use the term inspect what you expect, but there's guidance that's given from the coach or the mentor or the preceptor or whatever you want to call that person that's leading the team. But that's how it works. I mean, it's a perfect example of sports teams of how they work together. They work off each other. They back each other up. But they all have a common goal and expectation at the end of the day or at the end of the quarter or whatever it is. So that's the analogy I would use for everybody of what might be an example of what this looks like.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Is my mic a little bit better now?
It's definitely not cracky. There's a bit of an echo, but let's go with this.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I'll get a little closer to the mic.
Perfect.
I think when you have a culture of autonomy, of autonomy with no accountability. I don't know if any of you saw my LinkedIn post that was promoting this event, but I called it a dumpster fire. And it's really just a way of saying that everything will be in disarray. Nobody will be responsible for anything. Guidelines won't be set. Timelines won't be understood. Collaborators won't be looped in. So it's really about, autonomy is the power that you give to someone within the guidelines, like we've been talking about. Set up the project plan, the what, the why, the when, but the how is up to the employee, and it's up to them to ask for help. And so the important thing too is, as a manager, for those of you who are managers on the call, is creating a safe space so that employees feel like they can ask questions when they have them. If they don't feel like they can come to you and they're afraid to ask questions because they think the question will be too dumb, or that they feel that they should already know the answer but they don't. If they don't have that safe space to ask those questions, they're going to make decisions on their own, and sometimes they may be right and sometimes they may be wrong. And so it's important, if you want a culture of autonomy, to be able to for your employees to trust you and be able to come to you when they have concerns or questions. Another decision-making tool that you can use is something called a RACI. I don't know if anyone on the call has ever used this, but that stands for who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who is informed. And so as long as you have those 4 key expectations rolled out, and those are usually individuals or teams that fall within each category, then you should be able to expect that nothing will get dropped, or the decision that's being made or the project that's being worked on will be done thoroughly and in a way where everyone who's involved or needs to be involved is involved, and the employee can count on that to know that they're doing the right things at the right time. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, they're mutually reinforcing, right? So empowerment leads to autonomy, or autonomy support one another, and that empowers you to make the decisions and behave in autonomous ways. But ownership is really about accountability. And what I hear at the core of it is, what is the expected performance? What's the actual performance? And where is that gap? And how do we then address the misses in autonomous behavior, competence, capacity, motivation, and expected outcomes and or behaviors to really work backwards in a way to use frameworks to provide clarity. So expectations are aligned from the beginning. Otherwise, it's the dumpster fire that was referenced, right?
I just took a very quick look at the title of the panel, and I love the fact that we have culture right there at the beginning. So what is the challenge when building a culture of autonomy and accountability? Because at the end of the day, the teams are the echo chambers of their managers or leaders' personal preferences, work styles, their own approach and understanding of autonomy, accountability, delegation, and so many other things that feed into our conversation. So what is the role that HR can play in intentionally and mindfully building a culture of autonomy and accountability, and what is not the HR roles, but oftentimes gets thrown in the this is an HR thing bucket. And I would just ask maybe Jason to lead us into this.
Sure, thank you. When I think about it, I've mentioned this before on prior calls, podcasts here is, HR is a frame maker, right? We're like the playmaker, going back to that sports analogy. We're not the head coach. We're not the person on the field necessarily, but we're that playmaker behind that sets up the framework for success within a company. And we have an important role from that because we can help guide the organization from a culture standpoint to have a successful autonomous work environment that does, still have transparency and accountability and so forth. And when I think of a culture, I think of trust, right? So with an autonomous work environment, there has to be a high level of trust. But again, going back to what I said originally, there has to be individuality given to it because not everybody can work in a remote work environment with their roles. I work, I'm currently consulting and doing a lot of consulting in healthcare companies where obviously, people have to be on site, right? They go see medical attention. They're on site with nurses and doctors and staff and stuff like that. They can't work remotely. So how else can you set up an autonomous work environment for them? But the other people maybe within the company can work remotely. Same thing with work hours, so it's making sure that your culture is set around different experience touch points for different people within the organization. So that way they all can feel autonomous in their own special way that's meaningful to them. So again, folks that have to go into an office, making sure that their office environment is set up in a way that makes it very engaging. Maybe they get to decorate their own pod area if they're a customer service staff, where they can make sure that that's fun and engaging. Since have a lot of creativity around that. Maybe workstations are set up in a way that makes it a team-oriented environment. Again, going back to project work, making sure that project teams are set up such that it's open and easily accessible to sign up to different projects. And obviously, I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on communication. So overly communicating what the company's doing in order to foster this environment of autonomy, examples that they're doing. So companies often lack a good communication plan when it comes to what opportunities are out there for employees to sign up. Again, project teams, what's allowed from goal setting standpoint, and how they try and set up this culture and foster this culture with reinforcing examples.
Thank you, Jason. Where shall we go next?
I'll jump in. It's kind of a tiered approach, right? So HR is there as for guidance, right? And there can be some structure and framework that goes out. But really, when we talk about the magic middle, right? It's the managers that then can provide the team clarity and the guidance around empowering the team to develop a team commitment within certain boundaries. So I think that it's like the organizational mission, and you have a vision, but then it comes down to the project work or the management working with their team for deliverables. how does the team want to agree to get the work done? What are the mutually shared expectations and understanding of how the work is going to get done? When we talk about some of the remote and hybrid teams, we're seeing this where there's shared work hours across time zones. Rather than specifying that organization-wide, perhaps there's an extension or some team clarity that they come about in their autonomous team work that allows them to be successful and have some ownership in how they show up. So I think that HR helps set the stage and really helps tool up and provide resources for managers and the leadership team to be able to be clear with where they stand first and understand how they're communicating clearly with their team and using frameworks such as the RACI, setting SMART goals, things that until you can become and develop your own skill in clear communication, that you can use frameworks and tools to help you do so at that magic middle of management where really it's the greatest impact on the front line.
Yeah, I would add too is when it comes to who your managers are, that's where people ops and HR can really help as well. So many times managers are promoted because they're really good at their jobs, but that they're not necessarily good managers. And when you let those types of managers run wild and free, you're going to lose your culture of autonomy. And so when you do promote people to be in a management position, especially if it's their first management role, it's very important for the HR team to train them on the way that your company likes managers to manage people and really holding managers accountable to that mantra or those managerial values that you have set with your leadership team. So if your company, and not every company likes to operate autonomously also, I will say, so this, if you're in a company where none of this sounds familiar, it's probably not the right company for you. But in companies where they've declared that they want a culture of autonomy, of asynchronous work, of work flex, the responsibility is for the leadership team and the people ops or HR team to hold managers accountable to those values. And when they're slipping up, they need to be retrained, or if perhaps it's a more senior manager who's been hired from the outside and they don't actually share those managerial values, is determining whether or not that can be taught or whether or not they're just not the right manager for the company. So I would say that's a big role that people ops and HR plays in this subject.
Thank you.
So what I was thinking as folks were talking, so the role of HR, but also your department leaders and your operations leaders, is creating a framework, but designing frameworks that have flexibility. So where I work, we call it flexibility of framework. So it's not a free-for-all. There's still a structure, but it is not an airtight, very rigid structure. So for instance, let's say you're putting together a proposal for a client. Here's the elements of what would go into that. Here's the, suggested timeline of when you would have the pre-renewal meeting, this. You don't have to stick to it every step of the way, but this is kind of the general order of operations and the things that need to happen in these elements. If there's a way that's a little bit different that works for you and your team, that's great. If you're not sticking to everything in the exact order, but it's working, totally fine. But it's creating a framework so that we're aligned with what we're doing internally. So we're not recreating the wheel every time that these core business processes have to happen. Because I think what can happen when we're talking about autonomy is if there's too much autonomy, then it can be chaos because everyone's trying to create things from the ground up and make things for themselves. And that's not what always needs to happen. So I think kind of a nice middle ground for those of you who are working in companies is having a framework that has some flexibility to it. So you have some standardization and people aren't recreating the wheel, but they also have the ability and the autonomy to make it their own and figure out what works for them and their team.
Thank you. And spoiler alert, I will bring into the conversation a topic raised by Carl Ogden around the flexibility of work hours. But before I do that, I was just listening to everything that you shared so far, and it prompted a personal curiosity. And that is, can all of you think of maybe a story or an experience that really shaped your understanding and approach of autonomy and accountability within the HR function? So can you share some experience that you had with the HR flavor of autonomy and accountability? And I will give you a few seconds to think about, just enough to thank everybody in the audience for being here, welcoming those who joined a little bit later. And if you didn't get the chance to see Jessa's comments at the very, very beginning and you're wondering, yes, this conversation is being recorded. So you can always go back, watch parts that you missed, or rewatch the conversation, recommend it to friends and colleagues, either from the same link on LinkedIn where you joined initially from. In a few minutes after the live, it will be available, or hackinghrlab.io. So story time. Any conversation, any incident, any difficult conversation, any story that you want to share around the HR flavor of autonomy and accountability. And the more personal, the more points you get. Krisana, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I will definitely share a story. There was a time in my career where I had a manager who held everyone very accountable, but with no autonomy. And so what that ended up looking like for me was constant check-ins on a project where the expectation was that the work would be done in the way that the manager wanted it to be done. And so, you know, in those check-ins, being asked very specific questions about specific aspects in a project, and not having the answer because the way in which the work was supposed to be done according to this manager was never communicated. So it's really it's a problem of communication, but it was also a problem of you know, this mismanaged expectations. And so it ended up looking like, you know, coming to meetings and it would look like I was not prepared, and whereas instead I was prepared in other aspects of the project, just not the ones that that person was asking about. And so it was kind of just, it was very messy, right? You know, not having the right answers to certain questions, but then not being able to ask the questions I had about the work that I had already performed. And also is where I was used to a lot of autonomy, having those constant check-ins felt a lot like a micromanaged type of relationship. And for me, that's not at that point in my career how I like to work. So from there, it was having a conversation. So also to talk about the solution, right? So not to just complain and say, oh, this was the worst, terrible experiences. How did I handle that? And that was being able to say like, hey, look, I think that the way that we're approaching this project plan is a little bit different. Let's reset, talk about what we've both liked and haven't liked about the way that this is going so far, and then set new expectations. And that seemed to really help. I was able to voice that I thought maybe I was being checked in on too much and that I didn't understand exactly which steps of the project this person expected me to have completed by certain timeframes. So also resetting the project plan and talking about like each sprint, if any of you are familiar with that term, and making sure that within each we had a specific set of guidelines. And so it was still it was still not an autonomous type of working relationship, but at least at that point I understood what the expectations were more clearly, and I was able to deliver in a way that was, you know, expected by my manager. And from there, you know, and this was a new manager, and some of the notes I prepared for this meeting, it's when you have a new manager, it's really important to get to know each other outside of work if you can, so that you're able to build that trust level. Without the trust, there's going to be a lot of mismanaged expectations or miscommunication. And so building that trust first and foremost was really something that we had not done. And once we did that as well, we were able to kind of grow and learn together. So that's my personal experience.
Thank you, Chrisana, for sharing that. The J's, where do we go? Jason.
I'll go. This one's pretty simple. When I first got into human resources, labor relations, I was still going to do my master's degree, and unfortunately, two of the courses that I needed in order to complete my master's degree were during my work time, and only available during those afternoons. So again, having autonomy, working with my manager, we were able to work around that in order for me to complete my master's degree and allow me to go to school on those Wednesday and Friday afternoons. And for example, then I'd be able to come to the office and work a full day Saturday. Granted, back then there was no remote work. The white hair shows you it was a long time ago. But what I'll say is just having that flexibility of coming up with different arrangements at work is a form of autonomy. On the flip side, what I would say is I do a lot of consulting with labor relations and trying to do union avoidance and working with companies on union avoidance. That's the complete opposite. Employees working under union contracts typically don't have levels of autonomy because there's set work rules. So they lack a lot of this autonomy, again, having the ability. So, having, like we said, a culture of autonomy is truly very important. But one thing I'll just go back is that I was the only person in that office on those Saturdays. So, having trust that I was actually completing my work, doing what needed to be done on those Saturdays when I was the only person in the building, was real important. Similarly to, whether it's making big decisions at work, whether it's working adjusted hours, working remotely, whatever, there's a high level of trust that's needed in employees. And so it's really important to make sure that you're working through that with your employees one-on-one, whether it's role playing, whether it's giving them small tasks in order to build them up to bigger tasks and decision making, whether or not it's testing the waters, probationary from a standpoint of working remotely or different hours. And it's important to set those, like as we talked about, framework guidelines, whatever you want to call it, in order to continue building upon that culture of autonomy, whatever way it looks.
Thank you, Jason.
I'm not certain which direction I want to go with this, so I'll just jump in. Yes, I think for me, it's appreciation. It's appreciation of the leaders that I've had in my career who co-created and perhaps even job crafted as my positions and roles grew within organizations. That also lent itself to increased autonomy. And I think that what's coming up for me is back to an earlier comment about building relationships and being accountable to your team, to other people, right? In a way that for me, because one of my Clifton strengths is responsibility, that can also get in the way from a leadership standpoint and wanting to hold on too tight to things as well. So I think knowing yourself first and holding yourself accountable first is a way that can help lead to autonomy. One of the things that I really enjoy doing, and did this, Jason, also with healthcare organizations quite often when new leadership came in, was we called it leadership launch. And oftentimes what I'm hearing and seeing nowadays are these one-on-ones. A new manager comes in, they hold one-on-ones, they do these introductions, getting to know people. But what's missed is the team element of that, and not coming in as the leader in front, but as a partner alongside the team, and having a facilitator host the conversation that just is about getting to know one another. What are some shared expectations? Where is that new leader going to lean in to the employees to really get a better understanding so they can onboard in a way that can then empower and support the autonomous nature of work that's being done, or to pull back in and create some structure around the type of work that gets done. And what are some of the pet peeves? How do you prefer to communicate? All of those conversations early on in a leadership integration and leadership launch help set that stage for shared understanding. So those accountabilities later on are not new. That's my sense.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah.
Jessica.
Absolutely. So as others were talking, and I was thinking about, work examples of how autonomy has showed up at HR. There's been multiple situations in my career that I've worked with new managers in the organization, first-time managers who don't know how to get out of the micromanaging habit because they're delegating tasks and projects that they used to own. And, oh, if you just do it this way, and I would do this, and great, that worked for you, but maybe the person has a way that works better for them, or maybe they could do it more proficiently or even more efficiently. Whatever it is, you need to give people the space to figure things out on their own in a way that works for them. So I remember using an example with the manager of think about management as, like if you're the app Waze or Google Maps on your phone. This is the starting point that we're all starting at, and we're meeting for dinner or whatever at this location at 6:30 p.m. Before dinner, you need to make sure that you bring X, Y, and Z with you. You can have them done hours before, stop at the store on the way, get whatever you need. And you can also take whatever roads or route you want to get there. But as long as we both end up at that restaurant at 6:30 p.m. and you have your punch list and all the things that you need to have done with you, we are in a good place. And if it's not what you would have done, or it's not the order you would have done, or it's not the way you would have done it, that's okay. But give that person autonomy to figure out how things work for them. So I always think about that, right? Like if we think about management and coaching people more as like, we're the computer system, Google Maps or Waze, and this is where we're starting, and this is where we're going, and here's the expectations when you arrive, but you figure out what happens between point A and point B, off you go. And sometimes people need the opportunity to sink or swim. And if they sunk, then we'll debrief and help them, do better and make course adjustments for the next time.
Well, just keeping myself honest and coming to collect the point on flexibility of work hours, because that came out over and over again in the conversations we had around employee experience and employee satisfaction and engagement as a key factor for people. And I would really love to take a few minutes. We are about 13 minutes away from saying a painful and frustrating goodbye. I feel like we could have gone on for probably 2 more hours on this topic. But what is around flexibility of work hours that you would like to bring into the conversation? But I would also challenge you to think maybe beyond the immediate geographical reality of the US. And I will preface this with my own reality of my team at the moment. So I am based in Switzerland, I'm based in Basel, and we do have a flexible work policy in place. Because I am based in Switzerland, I enjoy the full flexibility of the flexible work policy. However, my colleagues who are cross-border workers from France and Germany and even Italy, they are bound by the double taxation agreements and other agreements to be in the office, I think 70 or 75% at least of their working hours. So as much as we want to be fully flexible, there are also legal requirements that do place constraints that oftentimes play out in quite effervescent team dynamics, because they would assume that I would be at the office in person at least as much as they are. I am not. And also, for example, my immediate team, one person in Brazil, one in the US, one in the UK, me in Switzerland, one in Singapore. So flexible work hours across a 13, 15-hour difference time span makes everything even more challenging. So again, I would really appreciate if we can maybe expand the outline of our conversation also outside of the US, and what are some of the elements that do feed into the flexibility of work hours?
I can go first. I think that from a business perspective, it's very difficult for a company to be able to operate with 6 or 7 different time zones. That said, it's the responsibility of the business to set the expectations before employees are hired, and asking employees to agree to this before they're hired, that between the hours of 3 and 5 p.m. Eastern, that's when our team is all online together, and that's when we hold meetings, and that's when you'll be expected to be at your desk every day and available for your team. If people aren't comfortable with that, then they need to consider that as they're deciding whether that's where they want to work. Now, you take COVID into it, where the expectations were that everyone would be in the office all the time before COVID. And then after COVID, everyone's at home still. And, companies like Dell are saying, if you don't come into the office, we're not promoting you. And people are still deciding to stay home. And I think that they didn't expect that to happen. And so now there's this question of, okay, well, how do we handle that? That's what happened with COVID and how the RTO, or the return to work, return to office, is being handled by different companies, is all something that we couldn't have expected. So that's like an anomaly. Everyone's trying to learn how to deal with that at the same time. There's no one expert, I don't think. However, so I won't speak on that because, like I said, no one's an expert. But if you're an employee looking for a new company, or if you're a company hiring a lot of employees, you need to set those expectations, either for yourself as an employee or for your teams as a manager, to say, these are the hours that we're all going to be together. And that is when, sorry, did I freeze for a minute? Okay, these are the hours that we're all going to be together. And so as you're hiring, you need to get the applicants to agree to this before they come on board. Otherwise, it really is, from a business perspective, HR is about keeping the employees happy, but within the scope of what the business needs at the same time. So HR isn't always going to be your best friend, because they serve the business as well. And so to be able to have those two things in mind is, if you are in HR and you're on the call here, is making sure that you're serving both. And that looks like setting expectations and then following them and communicating them down effectively to your teams.
Thank you. I just saw a comment from Brittany Smith, and thank you so much. I saw you really, really engaged during the conversation. That always warms our hearts. Procedural and distributive justice / fairness. And I just wanted to make a call out on the fact that fair is not always equal. And I think that's a good point, especially for flexible work hours and working conditions. And thank you, Chrisana, for your insights. Jessica.
So I think it's something that we always have to think about when we're talking about flexibility with where you work, when you work, is the core function of what that person does, but also how their employment is set up. For instance, if somebody is an hourly employee who works in a call center versus somebody who's a salaried employee who travels a lot and does client visits or whatever it is, those are two very, very different situations. So I think the point of equitable may or may not always be fair. We have to take all of those things into account when we're having these conversations, when we're making policies, because what works for one person and their role and their function and how their employment is set up may or may not work for somebody else. But I do think the one thing that COVID showed us in general is right? We can trust employees to work from home. People were still getting, deliverables done, showing up to meetings, doing what needs to be done. Of course, there were the exceptions to the rule and, the bad apples who took advantage. But generally speaking, most people were still productive and, did their jobs from home when overnight we all had to go home and do our jobs from home. But I don't think it's a one size fits all unless your business is set up that people have all similar functions and the same type of employment. But I think you really need to try to be as equitable as you can. But it's not necessarily realistic for most businesses to have like one felt swoop of like, here's our policy on this.
Yeah, so I agree with what the panels have said so far. As definitely setting the expectations up front is really important. There is some things that within work teams that can be done though to accommodate. Obviously, I have worked companies where it's been across time zones, and yes, the ones where I'm in the U.S. and they're in India or Philippines, of course, there's an expectation that they're working when it's dark and it's overnight shifts, but that's set up front. But then there's also where I'm on East Coast having meetings, and I have people in Hawaii, which is 6 hours time difference. So I'm like, as a leader, was I going to set a meeting at 9 a.m. for a team meeting when it's 3 a.m. in Hawaii? No, I'm going to do things that take the respect of the team involved and set a meeting in the afternoon. So that way it's, it's at least mid morning or not so early in the morning for my work team that's in Hawaii, 6 hour time difference. So there is things that are controllables that managers can do to accommodate some of these to make it and or making sure that project work is scheduled around overlapping hours. So when say it's the when I have to have a conference call with the team in India, I'll make sure it's a 6 a.m. call, so it's 6 p.m. in India. So it's somewhere where we can get on the call that's not completely an inconvenience to one side or the other. So you look for those commonalities of time to try and have project work, so that way there is engagement. Live engagement between the team members. So there's, control the controllables, but set the expectations up front. That's what I would say.
And I'd also remind folks that it's really a matter of choice. Autonomy is about a matter of choice, and conditions change. And I think really are we talking about the impact of the changing conditions and how is the organization responding to that? So for example, I'm working with a few people right now who did relocate during the pandemic and now are being called back to office. So they've been given a time frame to exercise choice to either move back so they can participate in the hybrid model or access resources for transition. So there is still choice in autonomous responses and how the organization can choose to be clear in that decision.
Thank you all. And we're 3 minutes away from wrapping this one up. So let's do a very, very value dense round before the wrap up mic drop question. If you could recommend HR people to think about one critical skill that underpins autonomy and accountability in the workplace and include that into the skill development and capability development across the organization, what would that skill be? And I'm really looking to hearing skills that are not the usual suspects that naturally come to mind. So some really interesting outlier skills that you would like to call HR people's attention to. And in the interest of time, I will pass the e-mic around and we will start with Jessica and then moving counterclockwise.
All right, so I'll just throw out very quickly in the interest of time. The first things that popped into my head were accountability and dependability. It's easy to give employees autonomy of how they get things done or figuring out how things work for them. If you know that ultimately they will be accountable for what's on their to-do list and they will deliver and be dependable and get it done.
Thank you so much. Jason.
My thing is just games, framework setting, being able to set up frameworks that people can follow. We might understand how it works, but being able to communicate, whether it's, again, teaching folks the racing matrix, teaching folks how to operate in a virtual environment, teaching folks how to manage key performance indicators with people, setting up project work. It's our job to be skilled at setting up these frameworks for success for autonomy, and communicate that such that people throughout the organization are able to access it, understand it, and implement that successfully.
Thank you. Chrisana, one skill.
Resourcefulness. And so that doesn't just mean knowing where to go when you need something. It means when you go there and it's not there, okay, now where do I go? It's not there, now where do I go? So that you're able to still deliver on what's being asked of you.
Thank you so much. And Jackie?
I'm going to say listening for significance. So what is getting in the way, and are we accurately diagnosing the gap between being autonomous and accountable?
Thank you. I will only take one more minute of your precious time for the wrap-up mic drop. In one word, how does a culture of autonomy and accountability feel like? One word, and we will do just as we started, clockwise. I will give you a few seconds to think about your one word. I will thank everybody in the audience for taking the time and the curiosity to be here. Thank you, Jessa, for taking good care of us. One word, Chrisana.
Empowering.
Thank you. Jason.
Customized.
Thank you. Jessica.
Trust.
Thank you so much. Jackie.
Intentional.
Thank you. It was a joy and it was a privilege spending this time with you. I hope you all enjoyed it. And I hope I will get to welcome as many of you on the screen and in the audience as possible in the near future. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the week and of the month. Bye.
Great job, Manola. Thank you, everyone. Thanks,
Thank you,
Jessa.
everyone. Bye.